Good afternoon. I'm going to give you the last lecture of this year of the subject Introducción a los textos literarios en lengua inglesa. I hope everything is right. I'm going to give you a lecture about William Carlos Williams. William Carlos Williams is a famous American poet. He was born in Rutherford in New Jersey. He took part of a literary movement called Imagism. Other Imagist poets like Ezra Pound or T.S. Eliot wanted to write poetry following a different literary tradition because Ezra Pound followed Asian poetry. He was influenced by haiku poems, and T.S. Eliot, he was influenced by European literature. But William Carlos Williams' poetry is different because he wanted to write American poetry and write about American lifestyle. William Carlos Williams' poetry is about everyday situations in our lives. He wrote about common objects, and his famous poem, The Red Wheelbarrow, it is about all things that we generally overlook, things that happen in our life which are important, but we don't pay attention to them. And in the poem, it is expressed how these things are important and they have even more merit because of not being appreciated, and they are often overlooked. William Carlos Williams' poetry was famous and important in the 20s and 30s, but it was overshadowed by the publication of the poem The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot in 1922, which was really successful. It was about the end of the First World War and how everything was devastated. William Carlos Williams' poetry is fun, it's full of irony and satire. I will talk about William Carlos Williams' biography just a little bit. He was born in Rutherford, New Jersey, and he died in the same city. And he was born from an American father, and his mother was from Puerto Rico, and she had ancestry from French, Dutch, and Jewish too. William Carlos Williams was a doctor, and he took part of Imagism movement. Imagism in poetry is a literary movement based on haiku. Ezra Pound started to write Imagist poems based on haiku poetry. In haiku poetry, we see that what Japanese poets were trying to express was the simplicity of life and images, the feeling that images transmit. Following Ezra Pound, who was one of the principal poets of the Imagist movement, William Carlos Williams, at the beginning he followed him, but then he began to disagree with the values of Pound and Eliot, who were very attached to European culture and traditions. Continuing with their experiments with techniques of meters and lineation, Williams sought to invent an entirely fresh kind of poetry about everyday life. The most important works by William Carlos Williams were Cora in Hell in 1920, Spring and All in 1923, Pictures from Breuel and Other Poems, from 1962, which was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, and the 5-volume epic Patterson in 1963 and Imaginations in 1970. William's health began to decline after a heart attack in 1948 in a series of strokes, but he continued writing up until his death in New Jersey on March the 4th, 1963. Imagism was popular from 1920 to 1917. The Imagist movement in English language poetry produced some of history's most renowned Anglo-American poets and poetry. Early 20th century poets and authors like Amy Lowell, T.S. Eliot, Hilda Doolittle, James Joyce, William Carlos Williams, and Ford Madox Ford, they are also associated with the Imagist movement. Imagism is poetry written that evokes pictures or images for the reader. Imagism presents the direct presentation of images or word pictures. Word choice is specific. Adjectives are used to enhance the specificity of word choice, but they are not overused. There is an attempt to freeze a single moment in time and capture the emotions of that moment. Imagist poetry often reflects influences of haiku or tanka. Haiku is a traditional Japanese poem of 3 lines with 17 syllables written in 5-7-5 syllable count, often focusing on images from nature. Haiku emphasizes simplicity, intensity, and directness of expression. Haiku began in 13th century Japan as the opening phrase of renga, an oral poem, generally 100 stanzas long, which was also composed syllabically. The much shorter haiku broke away from renga in the 17th century and was mastered a century later by Matsuo Basho, who wrote this classic haiku. Matsuo Basho is a very famous haiku poet. He wrote the famous haiku poem. An old pond. A frog jumps in. The sound of water. As the form has evolved, many of its regular traits, including its famous syllabic pattern, have been broken. However, the philosophy of haiku has been preserved. The focus on a brief moment in time, a use of provocative, colorful images, an ability to be read in one breath, and a sudden enlightenment. This philosophy influenced the American poet Ezra Pound. He was also very inspired on the image of the ninja and the sense of war of Japanese. We can see the influence of haiku poetry in Ezra Pound's In a Station of the Metro, which began as a 30-line poem, but was eventually pared down to 2. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. I am going to analyze the famous poem by William Carlos Williams, The Red Wheelbarrow. I am going to read the poem. The red wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rain water, beside the white chickens. The poem is about William Carlos Williams apologizing and expressing that we sometimes overlook things that are really important. For example, a wheelbarrow is an important thing for a laborer, and we don't realize about how important it is. The poem is written in small letters, showing that a wheelbarrow is considered that it is not important. And also, the color red shows that even if things are red, we are blind to them, because we don't give importance to things that are important in life. I am going to read another very famous poem by William Carlos Williams. This is just to say. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. William Carlos Williams wanted to write about conventional things of everyday life, and he wrote this poem in which he's apologizing for having eaten the plums to his wife. His wife was a housewife, and he wrote this poem and he left this note on the refrigerator, and then he published his poem in 1934. And the poem became famous because this is his typical American poem. His idea of no ideas but in things. This is totally the poetic philosophy that Williams championed. Free the line, write poems about anything. Be local, be American, no ideas but in things. The things in this poem happen to be plums. The speaker is casual and a little guilty. Williams wanted his poetry to be rooted in reality, with strong images. He was an imagist and a local feel. This is just to say is a work of intimate detail, just a few words laid out neatly that hold so much more. Charles Altieri has convincingly argued that Williams' little poem accomplishes major work, that it creates and inhabits a middle ground between myths of presence on the one hand and Derridean absence on the other, and functions as a speech act to affirm community and communication. A request for forgiveness for the small theft of some plums, the poem enacts the relationship, the relatedness with the wife, that permits the speaker to expect that he will be forgiven. I recommend you to read also poems by Hilda Doolittle, who was another famous American poet. I hope you have a nice afternoon. Thank you very much for watching this video. Bye bye.